No, okay. Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. My name's Tyler Crumpton. I work on all sorts of random things, whether that's microcontrollers, 3D printers, video game hacking, whatever, just silly things that interest me for the week and want to add to the pile of a million half-finished, unfinished projects. And this is another one of my half-finished, still going projects, so haven't given up on it yet. But yeah, basically what we're going to talk about today is writing JavaScript apps for the Flipper Zero. So there's a bunch of different ways you can write custom code for the Flipper Zero, and so I'm going to dig into one of these that I feel like is kind of the easiest to get into, and hopefully you'll see that as well. So, like Dusty asked, what's a Flipper Zero? How many of y'all have Flipper Zeros or know what they are? Most of y'all? I imagine you probably wouldn't be as interested in coming if you didn't know about it, but oh, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, but basically it's a multi-tool for geeks is what they call it on their website. It's got a bunch of really interesting hardware peripherals built in, and it's in a nice little, I don't want to grab this because I have a bunch of stuff plugged in, but nice little form factor. It's got a battery, screen, buttons, and then also has all the cool stuff like the SubGHz radio, NFC and RFID reading and writing. You've got Bluetooth and some GPIO pins, and you've got the iButton interface that I've never used because I think that's more popular in the EU, yeah. But it's also got an open firmware, which is cool. So you can sort of hack on stuff, add new features, add new apps, and change it however you want. And people have taken that and run with it because it's just a very popular platform for people to build on. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Building for the Flipper Zero. So this is how I first started looking at what it would take to build an app for the Flipper Zero. So back in the past, pre-2020 or pre-2022, the entire firmware was in the internal flash on the Flipper Zero. You had the C SDK that you could use to write apps. They had this hardware abstraction layer that you could use to talk to the different hardware, so that made it a little bit easier than writing directly to microcontroller ports and stuff like that. And it also had a pretty good debugging setup. They have this tool called FPT that lets you do step debugging, hitting breakpoints and checking all the memory variables and stuff like that. So it was actually pretty nice setup. But since it was all built into the firmware, if you built an app for the Flipper Zero and you wanted to share it with your friend, you'd have to give them the entire firmware that you built, or give them the little piece of code that you wrote so that they can build it into their firmware. And if you had two friends who are building apps and you want to share both of them, you have to figure out how to combine those into the firmware and get it built and published and pushed and everything. And it was kind of a mess. So they had a couple of really popular apps that they built into the official firmware. There were other firmwares that you could use that had a bunch of apps built in, but separating and just providing just little bits of here's an app for this, here's an app for this, go download this was really tricky until 2022. They changed how apps run. So they actually pulled them off of the internal flash and let you run apps on the SD card. And so you could build and compile just a single app, and you could send that to a friend, you could send it over Bluetooth, you could copy it over on the SD card, you could plug it in over the USB port and copy the files over that way. Made it a lot easier. And so now there's an app store that you can go and download apps from, and it kind of exploded. Everyone's all right, cool, we're all writing these apps. And the way it worked is it copied the app off of the SD card into memory and then ran it that way. Super cool stuff, and they have a lot of information about how they got that all to work. One other big benefit to moving it off is it's no longer tied to a firmware version. So it uses a scheme of doing a major minor version number comparison to say okay, is this app compatible with this firmware version, so that you can kind of have one app that runs on I think the versions were 97 around that time, 97.1, and it would also run on 98 and 99, but wouldn't run on 96 because you needed some piece of hardware that was supported now or something like that. And then I played with that. I built a couple of little really demo apps, just menus and screens and stuff. I really wanted to talk to a wireless radio that my company made, so I I wanted to like be able to like talk to it over serial, and it was like kind of a pain. The C SDK was like pretty crunchy. Like you had to know a lot of like deep details, and I was like, I don't have the time to learn this. So I kind of set it down for a bit, and then randomly, like earlier this year, I was like, I'm gonna go see like what the like latest like Flipper news is, and I see as like a tiny little comment in one of their release notes that they're like, here's some conversations about the JS API, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I want. I want the like easy, just like type some code, copy the file over. Don't have to worry about like downloading the tool chain or like figuring out how the HAL works and all this kind of stuff. And so then I was like, I have to wait now again, because like when I first grabbed the Flipper stuff, they were like, apps on SD card are coming soon. So I had to like wait, and then play with it. Same thing, JavaScript API coming soon. I had to wait. But it was super cool. So it uses a version of JavaScript called MJS, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But it's like a little limited, like embedded version of JavaScript. Yeah, so MJS. Basically, it's JavaScript for microcontrollers. It's a strict subset of ECMAScript 6 for the JavaScript nerds. It has a couple of things missing, so it doesn't have like a standard library. So these like string and number objects you don't have, but you still have like the normal primitives and stuff. There's like no closures, if you're familiar with closures in JavaScript. There's no exceptions. You can't like try catch your code, stuff like that. And they got rid of the silly double equals in JavaScript that no one needs to use anyway. And yeah, and then there's a lot of information on the MJS library. It's not specific to Flipper. It's just an embedded JavaScript that they pulled in and got working on the Flipper. So part of the JavaScript API that the Flipper does expose is they have a couple of like built-in things that are like handy to have for like when you're writing apps for the Flipper. So you've got things like require, so you can like import modules and other like little plugins and stuff. You've got like a delay, which is super handy. You say like delay 1 second, and it just like sits there, which is not a common pattern in JavaScript, but is pretty common on like microcontrollers. You have like a print that'll print to the screen console. So if you want to like show just some text on the screen, you can just say print, type the text in, perfect. They also have the console.log and error and warn and debug to print to the serial console. So when you plug it in over USB and you're like trying to figure out what's going on, and you have maybe dialogues and things on the screen, and like images and whatever, you can debug messages that way. It's pretty good to like combine those two when you're first starting. Things like toString to convert numbers to strings and stuff like that. But they also have modules. So this is parts of things that like talk to the Flipper hardware. So this is really like Flipper specific stuff. You've got things like the bad USB module that you can load in that does like USB HID emulation and being able to like type on like as a keyboard, stuff like that. That one's really popular. I don't really mess with it, but I know it's like really popular for like pen testing kind of stuff. You like plug in your Flipper and it opens up a terminal, copies some things, copies it down to the USB flash drive, and then runs out and stuff. They've got the serial, so that was the big one I wanted. They have two different serial ports. One's like a low power one, one's just a standard like USART port. They work pretty much the same. I think the LP UART is less power hungry, just by like a little bit, but they're pretty much compatible every other way. They have the notification module, which I think is super fun. It does all the like beeps and boops that the Flipper Zero makes. Like whenever you like scan a card for the first time, it goes like makes a little cute little chirp, or the like error noise, but it's like and it just tells you like, hey, something went wrong. So you can use those in your apps pretty easily. They've got the GPIO library for talking to all the different GPIO pins. So you've got like digital in and out. You've got the analog in. I don't think there's an analog out on the Flipper Zero. And then also like some of the pull-up resistor settings and inputs and outputs and stuff for GPIO, the normal stuff you would expect. There's a GUI one, and this is like where things get a little bit more complex, so I'll get to show y'all like what those look like. But it has a couple of different things that are already built in that they've pulled from the actual like C code firmware. So they expose some of those things out, and they're constantly working on it. So there's new ones like every couple of weeks. They add a new feature that wasn't there before. Right now they've got like menus, dialogues, text input, like a little loading screen view that you can use in that. And then within like, I think the last week and a half, they introduced the event loop, which completely changed how you actually write all the Flipper Zero like JavaScript stuff. So I had to throw all my slides out because I didn't write any slides before last week. What are you talking about? But it's I did have to go back and like learn how to like use the new pattern. So anyone familiar with JavaScript, you have event loops in most of the implementations that let you react to events that are happening. And that makes it a lot easier to do things like when a GPIO goes hi, go do this thing. When this timer fires, start this thing. When the menu button gets pressed, do this. Before you kind of had to either like do like a manual loop where you're just like looping over reading the GPIO pin and saying like, okay, is it high, is it high, is it high? Okay, go do something. Or you just had to like write a bunch of stuff really sequentially, and it was kind of hard to manage after a while. But I'll kind of dig into that because it's kind of complex if you haven't like messed with that kind of thing before. And they also have their own like little flavor of it, so it's not quite just like the Node.js event loop that some of you all are familiar with. Those were the modules for the official firmware. There's other third-party firmwares. The one I use a lot because they stay up to date with the official firmware and then add a bunch of cool things on top of it. They're really on top of doing new releases and stuff. Is the Momentum firmware. So that's one I love using. They added a whole bunch of like JavaScript modules like really quickly after the official firmware released it, and so they've been like adding that kind of stuff on top. And so one of those, the BLE beacon, I tried to play with that last night and I couldn't quite figure out like why my phone wasn't seeing that, and that's probably because I just don't know much about Bluetooth, but you can do the beacon advertising thing, so you can like have the Bluetooth LE stuff show up on like phones and stuff. They added the I2C and SPI GPIO interfaces so that you can like plug in I2C or SPI devices like temperature sensors or whatever sort of like modules you have that might communicate over that protocol. Really common in microcontroller land, so that's really helpful because I was talking to Matt about like some different sensors we could like plug into the flipper, and I was like, you might have to write the hey Dickie, might have to write the stuff in the normal app writing C code because we didn't have SPI and I2C, and then like what 2 days later they're like, oh here you go, here's SPI and I2C. I'm like, awesome, thanks. They have a flipper module that lets you get like the battery level. You can get the little dolphin's name, so it's like you can get his cute little pre-generated name. There's a couple other like little things that are like specific to the flipper that they just kind of threw in that like miscellaneous flipper module. They have the SubGHz module available in this firmware, which lets you do the low frequency like radio communication, so sending and receiving like 900 megahertz transmissions and stuff like that. I know we were talking about this with the Meshtastic stuff. Probably still can't quite like do the Meshtastic protocol on top of that, but you can still do kind of similar things where you're sending messages back and forth on the Flipper Zero. And they added a couple more like GUI hooks as well. So they have like a byte input keyboard where you can like type bytes in like the little hex editor thing. They also have a file picker, so you can like choose a file off of the SD card and do something like that with the like in the app if you need to like load something from a file, write something to a file. So they added that. So let's kind of get into the code. Like let's see what we can build. If you have not used JavaScript stuff before, you might not have Node installed, but if you do have Node installed, I think this is probably the best way to do like JavaScript development for the Flipper Zero. You can just write JavaScript code in a .js file in a text editor, copy it over USB, and run it on the Flipper, but they have this create FZ app. They have them for the Momentum firmware and the official firmware, so you can use either of them. And what it'll do is it will make a project for your code so that it like gives it a name, gives you a command you can run that will automatically build it, copy it over, run it, show you the debug log, all that kind of stuff over serial. Super handy, so definitely recommend using that if you have Node installed, or if you don't have Node installed, just install it, it's not too bad. So yeah, you can run npx and then run the command to do the create Flipper Zero app. It'll ask you for a project name, you give it your project name, it'll ask you what package manager you want to use. I just use npm. And then you say, I want to create it. And then you wait, and you wait. And it's a JavaScript project, so it's going to take a minute and a half to download and install 1,000 npm libraries and everything, but that's fine. It'll eventually get done. Then you don't have to do it ever again. So yeah, so it finishes, and it tells you, you can go into the directory, run npm start, and it'll automatically run the template app that they built for you. But before we do that, I'm going to go into the code and show you exactly the little index file that they made. So this is the little template app. I'll make it bigger in just a second. So some of you might notice that I said it had like a require module, so you could like use that to import code. The template app actually uses import statements. So, haha, I tricked you, it's TypeScript. TypeScript's better. We're going to be doing that instead. You can just write JavaScript, but this will automatically compile it down and run it anyway. So, it's a lot easier. All of the modules have type information, so you can like command click and like view exactly what the module is expecting, and the examples and the documentation. It's all built in, so you don't have to switch back and forth to the wiki. It gets out of date really quickly, especially when they're moving really fast. So the module imports, there's a note that it gives you about how some of them are kind of dependent on others. So that's one thing you'll have to kind of keep in mind, is the event loop is usually kind of the base thing that a lot of things depend on. A lot of the GUI modules depend on the GUI like base framework, so you kind of have to do those in order. I think it tells you an error if you get it out of order, but just something to keep in mind. So right here we're importing the event loop, the GUI framework, and like a dialog message. Then you can set up views. So views are like a pattern in Flipper development already, but they copied that over into the JavaScript API. So there's like a view dispatcher that like handles switching between showing like a dialog, showing widgets on a screen, showing text boxes, and all that kind of stuff. It makes it really easy to manage those sort of things and switch between them. So in the default app that they give you, they create a dialog that has like a header and some text and like a center button text that you can say like, I want the center button to say this. And that looks like this. So you get the header, the text, and whatever you want on the center button. You can also tell it to have a left button text, a right button text, whatever else you want. Then from that, we have some of the event loop pieces that I was talking about. So this is the code that handles like what happens when you press a button on this dialog. So this top one, we subscribe to the dialog.input event, and we pass in a function, a callback function, to call that when that event happens. So whenever someone inputs on the dialog, it will call this callback function with the subscription itself, in case you need to cancel it, the event, which in this case is the button that was pressed, and you pass in this event loop object so that it can be used inside of the anonymous function closure, because like I said, it doesn't have closures. It's just a kind of a weird thing. I don't think it's actually true though, because I take out the event loop passing in and it works. I think you can access the global variables. So while closures might not exist, I think it still accesses the global scope stuff. So should be fine, and it's actually a lot easier if you don't have to worry about all the extra variables you pass in, just so it has access to them inside the function closure. But what we do here is we just say like, hey, if the button is the center button, then we're just going to stop the event loop, which basically closes the app. On this other one, we're subscribing to the view dispatcher navigation event, and that's basically on any view. If someone hits the back button, you can subscribe to that and do something, whether it's go back to another menu or close the app if you're already at the root menu. Makes it really easy to build those sort of things and say just subscribe to the back button, do whatever I need to do. And then after that, you just use the view dispatcher to switch to the dialog view, and it will display it. So that's why we got to see the display up there. If you call switch to on like some other view, it'll switch to that one. So commonly used to like switch between like current menu and a submenu, or a submenu and a dialog that pops up for text, and then whatever sort of like screen you want to show after that. And then you just have to run event loop.run. So that is basically what tells the event loop just to spin. So it's like the last command you write in your JavaScript app. So it will just sit there and spin, no code after that will run. Not until you call event loop.stop. So if you call .stop, you can put some like cleanup code at the end if you want. Does that kind of make sense? I know it's like a lot of code, but I'm going to show a couple more examples, and maybe some of those will clear up. But are there any questions right now? Got time? Cool. So one of the things I made for this talk is this little PCB. It's got click. It's got buttons and LEDs on them, like little RGB LEDs. So if any of you have a Flipper Zero, I have a bunch to give out after the talk. Yeah, I think I have like 26. So hopefully just grab one if you have a Flipper Zero, especially if you have one here. But I also have parts for others if people need them. So slots in the top. It's got like these I/O pins that match up with the I/O pins on the Flipper. And I wrote like a little test script to kind of play with in this case it's the left button on the little board. So it's just hooked up to, I think it says GPIO C0. So if we look at that, we import the event loop and the GPIO library, and we set up the pin. So we're going to get pin C0. All the pins are labeled with their like on the GPIO headers themselves. My board also has them just written on there, so you can know what is wired up to what. And we set this up as an input with a pull-up resistor. You can also set them as interrupts for like falling edge, rising edge, stuff like that. I don't do that here because you don't actually want to use interrupts for key scanning usually in microcontrollers, because you have like debounce issues that you have to worry about, and interrupts are really for like high speed, instantaneous like protocol, like kind of reading kind of stuff, or if you need to wake up from sleep. Not really necessary for this. A couple different settings. You can have pull-up resistors, pull-down resistors, or no pull resistor. And all that's available in the documentation for the GPIO library. And then we set up the event loop to subscribe to this timer, periodic timer loop. So we have it set up for every 100 milliseconds to run this timer. You can also do a one-shot timer if you just want to say, like, in 1 second, go do this thing. But here we're using the periodic one. And you can see I ripped out my event loop being passed into the closure, and it works fine. So I don't know, makes it a little bit easier, cleaner. Yeah, and then I just do like a left button .read to get the state of the GPIO every 100 milliseconds and say, has it changed? Was it pressed and now it's not pressed, or was it not pressed and now it is pressed? Send out the thing. Because we're only doing that every 100 milliseconds, you get like automatic debouncing. So whenever you press the switch, it doesn't hit the like 3 or 4 times that the actual closure contact kind of jiggles before it settles. And then we set the state of the press button. And then you run it. Don't forget to run your event loop. That's a really easy thing to forget, because you'll just push your code over to the Flipper and it'll just not do anything. You're like, what? Why did it complete? Why is it finished? And the NPM package that they use to do like control of like copying the file over to the Flipper and running it doesn't really handle the scenario where the code runs really quickly and is done really fast. So it like shows up as like 0 port unavailable, and you're like, I don't think so. And so I spent like a bunch of time like checking my cables, restarting the Flipper, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just because I forgot to run the event loop, and the program was done before it was even checking for output on that. So just keep that in mind. So in this case, you like press the button, you get the message on here. So we were using the print statement, which prints to the screen console, and so like you get to see all the text on the screen. So for most apps, that's fine. If you don't need like a really fancy like UI or anything, you just print messages to the screen. Oops. Yeah, and then you let go, and it says button released. Super easy. You can use that to start doing some cool stuff. Also, since I have LEDs on here, so you can have GPIO out pins. So I set one of the LED pins out to a push-pull. There's also the high impedance, I forget what the name is, but push-pull is generally what I want to use. It's the fast one that doesn't use as much power. And then set up another periodic timer so that like every 500 milliseconds, it just like kind of flashes the light. So I can copy the apps over here and show it in person later. So we don't need that board anymore. Let's talk about drawing stuff. So this is like where your apps can get like really fancy. You can start drawing pictures, showing icons, displaying like graphical apps on the Flipper Zero. So yeah, that one I made a little snowman, and that's built out of the widget import. So that's where you actually draw directly on the screen. It's kind of a weird name for the module, but that's where that lives. You call widget.show either before or after you start to draw the widget, but here I just started before because you can show the widget and then start adding things onto it, or you can put all your stuff together and call show at the end. So you can add circles, you give it like the XY coordinates and the radius. You can add dots and draw just little pixels where you need to. You can draw text at arbitrary locations on the screen. They have two fonts, like a secondary and a primary font that you can use, just show the characters. You can draw lines. They have all sorts of like little functions to call it to draw stuff to the screen. And then I just have an infinite loop at the bottom that just keeps it running so the app doesn't end. I could have imported the infinite loop and just ran that as well. And it draws your little snowman, so you're so happy. The widget module can also draw images. So if you have an FXBM image, which is a Flipper specific XBM image file, which is like a weird, I think it technically like runs code to draw to the pixels and stuff. I don't really know much about the file format other than it's really strange, and you can't like convert a PNG and export it in like Photoshop or something to give you an FXBM file because it's like a specific thing. But if you have those images, which the Flipper like firmware normally uses for all its icons and stuff, you can load them and add them on the screen using the widget module and show them on the screen there too. So if you do that, you can like pull in a little picture. So speaking of converting the PNGs or images into the FXBM format, the built-in build tools for like compiling apps using like the normal C SDK for the Flipper Zero automatically converts PNG images over to the FXBM format whenever you compile the file. But if you don't want to set up the whole toolchain for all of that just to convert JavaScript stuff, someone wrote a Python implementation of doing the same thing. And then I grabbed the Python implementation and shoved it in this web page using Pyodide so that you don't have to run Python also if you just want to write JavaScript code for your thing. And so it will run that and automatically convert the things for you. So there's the link there. I'll show a link at the end as well to get access to that. But it makes it really easy to take a black and white PNG file and convert it over to the right format that you can use to load into your Flipper apps. So that's all the slides I've got, but I'm gonna try to like lean in and talk while I do stuff. But I do have some more like complex examples. This is not showing the right screen. Hold on. And mirror. Cool. I'll make that bigger. And I'll make this go away. Let me just go away. Cool. So one of the things that I really wanted to do with Flipper apps was talk to external hardware, and that's usually over like a serial interface, doing like a serial data. And so one of the things I built, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, and then I had to like completely refactor it for some of the new stuff that they put in. But I have just gonna plug it. The ESP32. This is the ESP32S3, which is a little Wi-Fi microcontroller. A lot of y'all have played with, I'm sure. And it's just plugged in over the GPIO pins to the TX and RX on the, I think it's on the LP UART. So it's wired up so you can talk to it. I wrote a little CircuitPython script to do a couple of different things with commands over the serial port. And so if I show some of these, you can kind of see some of the commands. I added, let's see, where is it? Here we go. Like a hello, just to make sure it's working, that goes and talks to the ESP32 and says, like, did I get a response? There's a scan that does like a Wi-Fi scan, scans for Wi-Fi networks. And then I also had some in here that I haven't ported over yet, but to like connect to a web page, go grab a value and send it back over the serial interface to talk to the app. So if you built like a little board that you wanted to use like an ESP to like talk to Wi-Fi stuff, they also have like the Wi-Fi module, like the official Wi-Fi module you could use to talk to it the same way and build your own apps that talk to that. But what that looks like in the app is I made the views. So all the previous examples only had a single view. This one has a couple because it's got like a submenu, it's got a Wi-Fi scan results screen, it's got a loading screen so that when it's sending a command to the ESP, it shows the loading screen while it's waiting for a response so you don't accidentally hit any buttons. And it shows like the user like, hey, it's doing something. And just a couple of like little dialogues. So the submenu view takes a list of items, makes it really easy to make a menu. And then the text box view and like loading view don't necessarily take inputs. There's a couple of things where you can set like a default value on text box input and stuff like that. And what that looks like actually is if I go to the dialog view and just like dive into it, this is why I like the TypeScript side of things. This is not, yeah, has all the props right there available for you. So you know that it has a header, a text left, text right, or a header left, center, right, all these like values on the input. And then also all of the examples and documentation in the code, so you can use that. Very handy. And so what this does, so let me plug this in real quick and tempt the live demo gods. Plug in over USB, just normal USB. Open up my terminal. And if I run npm start on my project that I built, compiles it, copies it over, and does something. I don't know what happened. Hold on. It's because I was in an app. Okay, let me exit this. That's what I get for tempting the gods. All right, so it's running now, and you can't see it right now, but I'll show you in a bit. But it's got like the little screen and doing stuff. So now that I've run that, though, I can actually close this, and I can open up QFlipper, which is really handy for copying files over, seeing the flipper screen, stuff like that. And we can actually see the screen. Since I copied the file over, I can go open it, and the default place it puts it in is in apps, scripts, and this one was called PN25 demo. So I can actually run the demo app, and you can see what it's doing. So it's got the hello. If I do that one, you might not be able to hear it, but if it successfully talks, it does the cute little doo-doo. If I unplug maybe the power and then try to do it, it does. How would that still work? Huh. Let me unplug the TX and RX. So if I unplug those, yeah, it does like the little sad beep. This is all okay. That's fine. I didn't want to say hi anyway. But yeah, I can also do like the scan Wi-Fi. You see the loading screen while it's doing the scanning, so it keeps you from pressing any buttons and canceling the operation. And then I'm using the text box widget to show all the results. So it's like a little scrolling box you can do. I think you can tell it to start at the bottom or the top. A couple other settings like that. But you just put text in there. There's DirecTV, Clarion admin, Clarion in, service. bunch of Clarions. Travel IoT 2.4, we can probably connect to that, do something fun. Yeah, they have a bunch of APs, so it's based off of the, I don't know, Wi-Fi, Hunter would tell me, the BSSIDs or whatever, something. Yeah, cool, I did it, I called it the right thing. And I have it set so that like when you hit the back button, it goes back to the menu. So using that view dispatcher event for the navigation event, you can hit back and always go back to the menu, makes it super easy. And then just an exit one that hits event loop.stop, so it kills the app, and you actually get to see anything I printed to the screen console that was running during the app. I think you can actually call die to like really kill the JavaScript app, but it's kind of handy to have something where you can just like exit in the middle while you're debugging and be able to like figure out, you know, what you need to, what sort of like debugging kind of stuff you had going on. I think that's that one. So I'm going to unplug this ESP32. I'm going to plug this back in. Cool. And then I unplugged the flipper. Okay, cool. It's back. If I run this little app, so this is that little board I was talking about. I have little buttons. When you press the buttons, it changes the little colors. It's super bright. I'm sorry I shined it directly into the audience. The ones that I have to give out have much higher resistance values on the LEDs because I use the LED resistance value calculator that you can like use online, and it tells you basically what resistor to use if you want it to be blindingly fully bright as possible that the LED will support. And so don't use those values. Don't use like a 50 ohm resistor. Use a 1K or something, which I did over there. But it's kind of fun. You can like play with the buttons, do the little LEDs, write your own app. So I'll have those to give out so you can like kind of play with your things. Yeah, and right now it's not doing anything on the screen, but you could add stuff like that. I do want to show some of the other API modules that they do have available that I don't have like really good example things built from yet, but they do have a USB. Oh my gosh, this is so good. Is this? I think this is the no. This is the compile code. So in the app that you build, it gives you the TS files and it builds the JS files and puts them in a directory. So you could just, if you want to like hand that to someone, you just take that JS file and give it to someone so that they can copy it over their flipper. But the, where is it? USB, they have the USB interface. It can do like a virtual USB mount where it shows up as like a flash drive on your computer, and you can copy files to and from it on that. I know people use that in combination with the bad USB module. So you show up as a HID device, you run some terminal command on someone's computer, you show up as a flash drive, you copy files off the computer, then you disconnect and clean everything up. So that's like a really common pattern that people use for doing their own custom like bad USB kind of things. This is one thing that I was going to talk about, and I don't think it is supported in the last rehaul of the JavaScript API, which is the FFI, the foreign function interface. So because we don't have access to everything that's available in the Flipper firmware, they gave us this escape hatch to run C functions from JavaScript code. They're kind of a hack sometimes. The JavaScript functions have built-in protections of like making sure to release GPIO pins when you're done using them, clean up after itself if an exception happens. These don't have any of those sort of protections, so you're kind of on your own, but it does allow you to do a lot of the stuff that you could do with the normal SDK that you can't do with the JavaScript API. So this is an example from before I updated my firmware that calls the FFI to play speaker sounds. So that's one of the things that's not currently available other than the notification API. So you can actually like acquire the speaker, start playing a frequency, call stop, and release the hardware back. And so you just actually type in like the C code that you want to run in the foreign function interface call, and it will make that function available for you to call in JavaScript later. So it's pretty cool. Gets kind of the weeds, and kind of makes me want to put it down and wait for them to like release more APIs so I can pick it up again in a couple months when everything's changed and everything's new and awesome again. But it's a nice stopgap for anything that you might have there. I want to pull up actually some of the other pieces here. So actually, if I go to the SDK in JavaScript or in the TypeScript library, they do have all of these modules, and this is the best way to look at like what modules are available. They do have some documentation. It's not always kept up to date, especially when they're moving really fast. So there's the flipper module that I was talking about that has like the battery life and stuff like that. There's the Bluetooth beacon. The GUI has all of the different screens and stuff. So if I wanted to use the byte input widget, it tells you what props it takes, what events it fires, all that kind of stuff. Super helpful things. They do a great job of like documenting the stuff in the code, so definitely use that. The SubGHz radio. So one of the things we talked about was like trying to figure out how we could make a little JavaScript game where you're like sending messages back and forth and like running around using the radio to like fire messages over whoever's nearby and do stuff like that. I know they've built really cool games where you can do like the rock, paper, scissors like built in. It does it over the wireless. It sends out like sync messages and says like, okay, and now it's send it out to everyone and let them calculate the game state on their own flipper. They do have the video game module. Does anyone have that for the flipper, the video game module? It's really cool. I never could like justify like actually like grabbing it because I'm like, I'm not gonna use my flipper as like a Game Boy, but it is super cool. It has like accelerometer. It's got like another processor to do like video game stuff on it. Super neat. They do have that available, so you can like write games using that. And it has all of the stuff like the yaw, pitch, and roll of like the accelerometer data and everything like that. But yeah, I think that's mostly what I wanted to show. I did like leave a little bit of time afterward if anyone had any questions or wanted me to like dig into something. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious. Is that, it looks kind of sort of like VS Code?
Oh yeah. So I'm just using normal VS Code. I don't have any like extension plugged in for this. So that's what I use to explore the SDK. You just like if you go in and you import one of these things, you can just like command click or control click the thing and like dig into it, and then you can go like up the chain. But you can also just open the files and look at them. They're just TypeScript type definition files. Cool. Yeah. What's up?
Is Momentum your firmware of choice, and what do you like?
I like Momentum. I didn't really dig into the alternate firmwares for Flipper too much before this. I do like how close Momentum stays with the official firmware. Like every time they release something in the new official firmware, it's like a day before it gets ported over into Momentum. So I do like that it's pretty compatible. For the JavaScript stuff in particular, it's really nice because of all the extra modules that they have added and haven't ported back into the official firmware yet. But they also have some of you have like compatibility checks in the JavaScript API that you can use to make sure that like, hey, is this thing available to me? Then use it. So if you're like writing a script that you might give to someone who's on an official firmware, might give it to someone who's on Momentum firmware, or some of the others, Unleashed, or whatever the other popular ones are, you can do checks to say like, is SubGHz available to me? If not, then we can kind of skip that part and let the other app run. Or you can say like, show a message that says, hey, this needs SubGHz capability. You need Momentum firmware or some other firmware that supports that. The other reason I really like Momentum is whenever you turn it off, like whenever you hold the back button to turn it off, Brimstone showed me this, that it only takes like half a second to turn it off, so you can just like throw it back in your pocket and turn it off. The official firmware, it takes like 7 seconds that you have to like hold forever to turn the thing off, and it meant that I never turned it off, and then the battery would be dead in like a week or whatever. So I did like that. Yeah, Brimstone was like, why is it taking so long? I was like, I'm on a dinky normal firmware, I guess. I don't know. I never needed one of the special ones, but for the JavaScript stuff, definitely recommend using Momentum. Any other questions? Oh, I said I would show the link. Yeah, if you go to crump.space/pn25, it's written on the PCB also. if I type that right. Am I on the I'm not on Wi-Fi. I have a couple links to Momentum, the board files for the PCB, so you can like look at the PCB Gerbers and the source codes all in KiCad, all open source. And then some of the links to like the FXBM converter little page hosted on GitHub pages, so you can go use that to convert images over. So yeah, just crump.space/pn25. It'll be on the boards if you want to come look at it. But yeah, anything else? Any other questions? Thank you so much for listening to me ramble for like 45 minutes. That's awesome. I appreciate it. Come find me afterward if you want one of the little boards to play with. And